Our guest today is Dr. Gordon Christo. Dr. Christo is the director of the Adventist Heritage Center for the Southern Asia Division, and he serves as the editor for the Southern Asia Division for the ESDA. Dr. Christo, thank you very much for agreeing to this interview today and for joining us.
Hello, Dr. Raymond. Hello, Dr. Santrac. It's my pleasure to participate in this conversation today, and hello, viewers, wherever you are.
Tell us something about your role in the ESDA project and your team. How has it worked being the assistant editor for the Encyclopedia for Southern Asia?
From the time I first heard about this project, I wanted to be a part of it. And as the editor for Southern Asia Division, my role has been to process the selection of authors, to guide them through the writing process, and to polish the articles as they come in. But what I've enjoyed most is actually writing articles myself. I do have the help of secretaries of the unions who help to coordinate the authors from their territories.
And we'll just clarify, because not all viewers understand just how the church works, but you're referring not to an ordinary secretary, but to the executive secretary of the union, which is of which there are a number that make up the Southern Asia Division. So you're referring to one of the offices of the church in each region.
Exactly.
Yes. Dr. Christo, what inspired you to get involved? You said from the time you heard about it, you were interested. So what inspired you to join the team, and what benefit do you feel an encyclopedia will have for church members in India?
Our division has no published history. And very often I get calls from people in the field or from other offices at the headquarters, such as who was the principal of Harper School in 1946, or when did Pastor Champion's wife die? Do you have any photographs of Grace Kellogg? How did the church, how did the division face the economic crisis of the Depression? What measures did they take? Now, these are actual questions that have come to me. Now, I'm very happy to help them find answers to these questions. But once we have the encyclopedia, they'll find all of these answers in the encyclopedia through the biographies, through the histories of schools, hospitals, church units, and the photographs that accompany these articles.
And the photographs are one of the things that we in the main office have found most exciting. Dragoslava, I think you'd agree. The photos that have been sent in, the great majority of which have never been seen before by 99.9% of Adventists. They're unknown. They're not in the Adventist currents, as it were. And it's exciting to be getting some of those photographs from India as well.
And what's very interesting is that Dr. Christo shared a number of photographs from his family's collection. Dr. Christo, you wrote several articles on missionaries to India and church administrators that you and your parents knew. For example, the Mattisons come to mind, and you shared some beautiful photographs from your family collection. How was it growing up surrounded with these wonderful missionaries and dedicated people? Would you care sharing maybe a story or two that stood out for you and that you shared in the encyclopedia?
They've been all together. I have on my desk a list of missionaries who have served in Southern Asia. There's 725 names on that list, and most of them came with their wives. So there's a total of more than 1,000 missionaries who've come. You mentioned the Madisons. The Madisons stand out, as also the Lowrys, McHenrys, because they served for 3 generations in this division. Other names that stand out are those who've given their lives while at Southern Asia. I think of Robinson, I think of Little, I think of Salisbury himself. But yes, well, I'd like to pay tribute to all the single ladies who who came out to Southern Asia as colporteurs, as nurses. And sometimes there were more women missionaries in India than men missionaries.
If we look at,
many of them single.
If we look at the at photographs of the first mission station in Calcutta, there are of course quite a number of women and several of them single. Georgia Burris, for example, and there were others. So I'm glad you highlighted that, because it is an important part of the history in Southern Asia, but it's also true actually in other divisions. Very often nurses got sent.
Yes.
The church liked to insist that its male missionaries were married, but it was happy to send single females, which is interesting. Says something about the different cultural values, I guess. But that's even today. I think many young, because they often were young, single women might feel a little daunted at going to a very different culture, far away from home. And that would have been even more so 100 and 120 years ago. So it's an important part.
And it's also interesting that the first Indian national convert to Adventism was a woman, and also the first baptized Adventist Christian in India was a woman as well. So yes, and Biesda will highlight all these women that perhaps were somehow neglected in the past in our historical recordings. And I really appreciate you brought that subject up. Yeah.
Yes, and I think this project is going to bring out, as you mentioned, a lot of names that have been neglected. One of them is, I'd like to share Fairley Masters. Fairley Masters was from New Zealand, actually, and one of the 3 first colporteurs to come to India. We always talk about Stroop and Lenker, but we forget about Fairley Masters, who came just a few months later. Actually, Fairley had been born in India when his father was a captain in the army. And when they went back to New Zealand, they became Adventists. And when the call came for colporteurs to come to India, the General Conference decided that there should be one from North America, one from England, and one from Australia, or the Australasian division. So Fairley Masters was the one who came from there. He had to pay his own fare, so his parents paid his fare, and they also volunteered to come with him. So the 3 masters came. They were working in Madras. Then Mrs. Masters got ill, so they had to move to Calcutta for treatment. And providentially, while they were there, they could help Georgia Burris, who landed in Calcutta while they were there, and they were able to help her find a place to stay. Because of her condition, the Masters returned to New Zealand, but Fairley Masters stayed on in India for 2 more years. And what's interesting is that he didn't stay in a hotel or a lodge or a home. He lived in a tent that he carried around on his bicycle and traveled with his cook. So that while he was selling books, his cook was looking after the tent and preparing his food. And this way, nothing was stolen from him. And he was able to eat proper food and go wherever he wanted. Fairley Masters went back, but his son, who was also named George Masters, and his wife came back to India 25 years later, 30 years later, just to learn the language so that they could go back to their division and work among the Indians in Fiji. So there you have 3 generations of masters who worked just for a few years, a few months each. But nobody knows much about Fairley Masters. And I hope that the encyclopedia will bring out names like this who have served well, but who have been forgotten.
Thank you for sharing that, Gordon. Viewers won't know, but I was actually born in India, where my parents were serving as missionaries. And so I've always been interested in the history. And I recall reading about this. I think it's in the old encyclopedia. There's a brief passing reference to Masters and his parents, but it basically says, well, but we don't know anything about him. And it's left as a kind of a mystery. So to hear more about him and his parents, and then that his son also worked amongst people of Indian ethnicity in Fiji, that's quite remarkable. And that brings out the reason that we have a new encyclopedia rather than simply a 4th edition of the old one, because we're finding out new things, we're completing stories, we're uncovering stories that we didn't know before.
Yes, and now that we are mentioning people whose names are not so well known in Adventist Church, perhaps we can also say that the encyclopedia will include a number of articles on national leaders, evangelists, you know, and names that perhaps even the local people don't know so much about. For
That's
example, Matty Daniel Moses, who was the first National Indian Union president, and many others that we will publish in the ESDA. So it is significant that the people learn about their native local people and local Adventist church history. Do you agree, Dr. Christo?
Oh, absolutely. Because even with these Indian workers, sometimes there's some mystery that surrounds them, and some stories and some rumors. And the encyclopedia can clear up a lot of these things.
True, true.
Yes, and having the certainty I think is often a great value, because people will say, well, where and when did we start? And if we don't know that, then it's hard to have a strong identity. So I think that's another potential virtue of the ESDA, that it will help to strengthen a strong sense of Adventist identity. Of course, how does that then get inculcated? It's through schools, and India has a strong history of Adventist schools of various levels. One of them is the Raymond Memorial Training School. Dr. Christo, what's your attachment to that institution?
Yes, this Raymond Memorial Training School is something that's quite close to my heart, largely because the school traces its origin to Kamatar. And Kamatar was our first outpost mission station, really out in the boondocks, about 170 miles from Calcutta. But if you've ever been there, it's a little town, practically just some homes around the railway station.
And a cemetery, of course, in which there are Adventist graves.
That's correct.
Robinson and
Brown.
And Brown, yes, Fred Brown, yes, Robinson and
Yes,
Brown.
died of smallpox in December of 1899. A publishing house was there in Kamatar for about 5 years before they realized they needed to be in a place where there was better communication, better facilities, better access to supplies. So they moved out, and the school, as I said, Raymond Memorial School, was there in Kamatar. It wasn't Raymond Memorial School, it was this orphanage that Brown and Robinson were at. But when the school moved away, then the union office moved onto that campus. The school moved out in 1949, and the union office moved in 1952. And my dad, my parents, and our family moved there because he was the union president. And while we were on that campus, I felt very close to the pioneers. The locals pointed out spots where certain people lived. They told us stories that around that campus, the villagers could see guards on white horses marching around the campus. Up in the attics of those buildings, especially the office building, I found some real treasures, like, a Petromax lantern, a slide projector, Petromax slide projector, which they called a magic lantern in those days. I was just a teenager. If it was now, I would have taken those things and brought it here to a heritage center, but I really missed getting some of those things. So scores of our pioneers lived there. I loved that place and the quaint little church that is on that campus.
Why did they move the school to a new campus?
Ah, yes. The school had grown into a training school, and there just wasn't enough place there for farming and the industries that usually accompanied our training schools. And then a certain lady, Catherine Raymond, passed away and left her estate to the church. She was from the area close to where the school moved. And for about $12,000, they purchased more than 500 acres of land.
Yes, yes. I mean, Dr. Christo, when I listened to you telling these very personal stories and how being in touch with Adventist history and heritage made you feel as a young person, and now it seems like you are redefining the term of encyclopedia. For some people, encyclopedia may sound very intimidating, like a very scholarly work, something that's only for scholars and not for ordinary people, but you make us feel that encyclopedia is actually for everyone. So in what way is the Encyclopedia of Seventh-day Adventists significant for all people, for those who really want to learn more, like in a scholarly way, but also for other people who just want to read stories? Is there something for everyone in the Est?
You know, when I was in high school, I hated history. When I was in college, I hated history. And it was only as
shows there's hope for everyone.
Yes.
You know, I'll tell you, when I was in high school, I was failing history. And I thought to myself, I will never take history again. But when I got to college, I found out that to do a theology major, I had to do a religious history minor. So I did a religious history minor. When I went for my master's in the Philippines, the only two professors were there. All of the others were on leave. So I had a theology professor and a church history professor. So I had a major in church history there also. And when I went to Andrews to do my doctorate, the dean asked me, what do you want to study? And I said, I'll do Old Testament. And he said, okay, what about your cognate area? So I said, okay, I'll do Adventist studies. That intrigued me. So he signed on it, on the form. And then he said, go and get Mervyn Maxwell's signature. I said, Mervyn Maxwell, that's the church history department. He said, absolutely, that's in the church history department. So I had to do what I enjoyed it by that time, doing Adventist history, and it's been my pleasure. History is stories, and everybody loves stories. Young people, old people. And if you look at it from that point of view, it's fun and it's informative.
Very true, very true.
And thank you for sharing that story of your personal story. I think that's it. You know, everyone has a history. Sometimes when and I used to say this to students when I taught in Adventist colleges some years in the past, sometimes we think of history as meaning 1,000 years ago or 500 years ago, but all of us have a history, including our history of our own relationship with God and how God has worked in our lives. And the church history is partly a history of how God has worked in the life of his people and in the movement. But the stories are important. And we have produced a scholarly work, and Dr. Christo knows, because he has to find peer reviewers as for articles as well as the authors, and we go through many processes. But I'm glad you touched on that, because ultimately history is story. In English, of course, you literally can't have history without story. You only have he. And in some languages, actually, the words are the same. I think of storia in Italian and so forth. So we have tried to bring that out. And is that something you've tried in your area of articles?
Sorry, I didn't get your question.
Is that something you have done as editor, to try and bring out the story element as well as the factual educational element?
You know, if it's just facts and if it's just factual, then it gets boring. But if you can bring out the human interest aspect of the lives of people and the work that our institutions are doing, then it means so much more.
Yes, it's true. And as Dr. David mentioned, the word history, there is also wordplay with his story, and we want ESDA to be his story, Christ's story, the story of his leading and his church. And it's very important to say to our viewers that all ESDA articles are signed. by authors, and their short biographies are included, and all articles have notes and a list of sources, so information can be verified, because we really sought to present reliable and authoritative information about Adventist history, but also at the same time a history that's faith affirming, inspiring, because we are here where we are as a church thanks to the past generations, their sacrifices, their commitment, and we are now in the position to take the message and continue the work as we await Jesus' second coming. So this is their legacy to us, and we hope to leave the same legacy of commitment to the new generations that will come after us.
So yes, if we can blend the factual element and that core of information that needs to be there, such as you mentioned at the start, Dr. Christo, about when was this started, when did this happen, but also bring out the human interest. That's what we've sought to do. For our viewers, when you explore the encyclopedia, you'll have to see how well we did it. Dr. Christo, as we move towards the end of this interview, and we thank you again for taking the time, we know you're passionate about the preservation of Adventist heritage, especially in India. As we mentioned at the start, you're director of the Adventist Heritage Center. And as you said, if you now came across an old magic lantern that church leaders of the past had used, you would take it and put it in the Heritage Center. Why are you passionate about that heritage? And can you tell our viewers about what you see as the significance of Adventist history and heritage, especially for young people?
Till about the year 2000, most of the Adventist children or young people in Southern Asia studied at Spicer College. Over there, they took a course in Adventist heritage, various programs of the church, acquainted them more with the stories of our pioneers. But that's not the situation now. Most of our Adventist youth are not in our schools or colleges. They don't have the opportunity to learn of our heritage or even our doctrines. And this would be an important resource that young people will go to. All of the young people have access to the internet through their smartphones. The world in which we live today is so different from that in which our pioneers lived in. They established schools that we and our children study in without knowing how the schools were established. They planted churches in which we worshipped, or our ancestors were brought in to worship. And learning about the dedication and commitment of these pioneers, I believe, can renew our spirit. I have a daughter who's written several articles for the Encyclopedia, and I know that she has been blessed by writing about their lives. And I hope that other young people will have the same experience as they read these biographies.
And indeed, we can say to our viewers, you don't have to be somebody, a venerable scholar employed at an Adventist university to write for the Encyclopedia. We have many more articles still to finish, or indeed still to begin. So if you, as you read articles on the Encyclopedia and you feel inspired, please do get in touch with us. There's a place on the website. I know Dr. Christo still needs quite a number of authors, and indeed most of our assistant editors do. And you too, I'm speaking to the viewers now, you too potentially could have that experience of Dr. Christo's daughter, of being inspired by discovering as one does the research. But that's not going to be for everyone. But that practice of that experience of inspiration can be for anyone who goes on the Encyclopedia website.
Yes, and as Dr. Trim, you mentioned, I would like to tell our viewers that on the website there are author guidelines and examples how to conduct historical research. So hopefully that will encourage you to engage in writing. But if you feel like not qualified to write an article, perhaps some of our viewers have letters or diaries or photographs of historical value that they are willing to share with us. So please contact us or Dr. Christo through the website, and we will be very happy to have those valuable artifacts, either in the Heritage Center or maybe even at the General Conference archives. So these are valuable materials for future researchers as well.
Indeed, and even if people are unwilling to part with them, we can probably help them digitize them, so we can make them available through the ESDA site.
Yes, yes.
Dr. Christo, thank you so much for being our guest, and thank you very much for the work you've done for the Encyclopedia of Seventh-day Adventists. We believe it will be a tremendous blessing to the Church in the Southern Asia Division and indeed beyond.
Thank you, Dr. Trim. Thank you, Dr. Santrac. It's been my pleasure to be part of this team. I've really enjoyed the experience, and I will keep on enjoying it.
Thank you.
And thank you for the fact that you will continue to work for us as we move this project towards its completion. But we're glad now that it is launched and that we have articles from across the world, and indeed written by authors from across the world, including from India, which wasn't the case with the old encyclopedia. So Dr. Christo, thank you again.
Thank you.
That was Dr. Gordon Christo, the ESDA Assistant Editor for the Southern Asia Division. Please read the articles that Dr. Christo has written, the articles that he has edited on India, and please check out some of the other more than 2,000 articles at encyclopedia.adventist.org. See you soon with another ESDA editor and new stories from the Encyclopedia of Seventh-day Adventists online at encyclopedia.adventist.org.